Good evening, everybody. My name's Alistair Cameron. I'm a local resident and have been involved in the proposal for Save Bellfield since it first started. In my day job, I work with some extremely enthusiastic groups of people, and I often find myself saying, it's better to get it right than to get it fast. With the Save Bellfield campaign, we've had to get it fast. We've had to work extremely fast. It was the end of March, I think, when Ian and Justin and I and Chris Booth sat round a table, and Tim sat round a table in the beach house and said, we've got to do something. By mid-April, we had set up a public meeting to which 75 people turned up, much to our astonishment. And since then, we've done an awful lot. But I think the sense is that on the whole, we've also got things right as well as fast. And I think that's down to an awful lot of hard work.
And I want to tell you the story so far, not the story since 1809 when the church was built at Belfield Street, but the story just in the last few years of discussions that we've had with the church as we've been aware of St. James closing, the likelihood of Belfield closing, other facilities disappearing, and aware of the population of Portobello increasing and the need to keep these spaces, but also people's specific love for this particular building, this particular place, and that's really kind of empowered this work. So the story in the last short while, as Alistair said, it involved the first public meeting in April that probably quite a few of you were at. There were 70 folk in all, something over 70 folk at the start of that meeting. We reflected on what was important about the church in terms of what had been happening, the cafe, the groups, the evenings, the events, and then also people's history of experience of weddings and funerals and the rest there. And there was a strong sense that we need to keep the church. We had a vote at the end, unanimously voting for Friends of Bellfield to come into existence as a community group to try and save Bellfield for the community. A lot of ideas were generated, and discussion of how do we do this. There were loads of ideas, but there was also a question of how on earth do we go about this. We then moved on to quite a lot of community engagement, two of which were kind of highlights, were the cabaret night that I'm sure lots of you were at, and it raised £2,000. It raised a lot of awareness, and it also brought in the volunteers that we needed for the next key stage of the work. The finance we're looking for this is from the Scottish Land Fund, and that's been in existence for, I think, about 12 years. It's increased the amount that it has from 3 million to 10 million this last year. This extended to cover urban areas in April, which was kind of lucky for us, because that's kind of a vital piece of this jigsaw. And we've been very lucky in that way. Alistair pointed to the fact that we've got a great team of people with very diverse skills and a great support from everybody else in the community. We've also been lucky with the fact that things like the Community Right to Buy is extended to cover urban areas as of April of this year. We secured £16,000 for a Stage 1 grant for the valuation, for the building conditions survey, and to tender for and appoint a team of consultants, to my right, Urban Animations. And we also needed to create Action Porty, a membership company, for the purpose of the Community Right to Buy. When we came to the Community Right to Buy piece of this jigsaw, we suddenly had to make sure we had enough members, and so we had 4 days to recruit, and we recruited 340 people in that time, so thank you very much for signing up at such swift notice. For that, we needed to define our boundaries and then ensure that we had at least 10% of people within that area, of voters within that area, signed up to this process. And Mary Campbell in particular organised extraordinarily efficiently the door-to-door thing, which probably lots of you are involved in, and thank you again for that. Getting about 25% of Porty voters from that area signed up over that time was quite an achievement. Then the open day above the library in September, where Urban Animations presented their kind of thinking so far, where they'd got to, and we had very strong conversations with people about their input. It was fantastic. I mean, this isn't about numbers, this is about intensity of people's commitment to and their concern for both the church itself, but also just for the community's needs and their visioning of what's possible for this community. So, in summary, get involved, buy the prints and mugs, and spread the word, and help fundraise when we get to the next stage, but that we'll talk about a bit later.
You'll no doubt recognise from the slide immediately that the blue bit is the Firth of Forth. The big red circle there is the church building. It's an important local landmark. It's a listed building. We had a building condition survey undertaken a few months back, which indicated that structurally the building's sound, so that's good news. It's in generally good condition, other than the kind of ongoing maintenance repair issues that you would expect for a building of that type and age. The halls are actually very usable, attractive spaces already too. The large hall here, nicely lit, stage at the end. They're usable spaces already. There's been a loss of spaces available for community rental in recent times, and the loss of a further 2 halls is obviously one of the key needs that's driving this project. There are still a number of headstones and memorials in the ground. We are still trying to establish what the status is of that burial ground at the moment. But we know that remains have been moved in the past to allow the church halls to be built. So we don't think there would be any significant issue. There's a maintenance issue there. Some of these memorials are in the walls that surround the site, and they need a bit of work on them to ensure they're stable. This is a floor plan, the ground floor of the building. The blue area is the ground floor of the church, and the large and smaller yellow boxes are the 2 halls. As I say, they're useful spaces already. They have been in use. The halls are specifically designed for the purpose that they've served, and the church space is a ceremonial space which could continue to be a satisfactory space for that kind of event, whether weddings or funerals or so on. The slide I've got up here is taken from the upper level in the church building. Interesting, when you get up there, you would assume that all of these seats are a great view right down to the front here, but in fact most things just focus on the pulpit. So the seating isn't ideal for looking at the stage area, as you might call it, the blue carpeted area down here. So that potentially gives us a bit of an issue with the kind of events and activities that you could host in the space. And this is the kind of thing that you might do to resolve these raked spaces, potentially levelling out some of the sloped areas to create spaces that could be used for activities and rentals by local groups, to create some adjustments to the seating to ensure that you'd get a better view of any activities or events that were taking place. So we've spent a fair bit of time looking at the building, looking at the possibilities for altering the building, but what's really driving our thinking is what local people have told us that they want, and that high level of engagement that's taken place, driven by Action Porty and a bit of work from ourselves, has gathered an enormous amount of information. And the fascinating thing is that most people have said largely the same thing in terms of what the project as a whole should seek to achieve. And it's this very, very simple vision of a mixed activity building, but of fundamental importance. It's owned by the community and it's managed for the benefit of the community. And the core uses that most people want to see in this building actually reflect the need that is known locally, the uses that have taken place there in the past. So it's, on the one hand, community rental of the halls. People need it to continue. There isn't anywhere else for those groups to go that is a satisfactory space. Continued use of the former church space as a ceremonial or gathering space. A cafe. There was a successful cafe attended by many of you in the past. And then the opportunity to use perhaps some of these spaces a bit more regularly for things like events and performances and arts and culture. So the building, the halls, the church, former church space, those spaces themselves, there's not an enormous amount of work needed to change those. Some detailed things that you might do to the large hall, for example, creating improved storage. Perhaps creating a dividing screen that could split the space into two so that different groups could use it at the same time. The main thing that we think would be beneficial is this pink area in here, which would be a new foyer and arrival space, which could incorporate a new cafe. And it would also form part of an area that would link the halls and the church space much more effectively. We think a new arrival point would help to pull the whole building together. So a big question for a lot of people at the drop-in event that we had was, how can this work? Will it stack up Most people nobody wants to take on a liability. Everyone needs to know that the project can wash its face. The number of costs associated with this kind of operation, just from things like insuring the building, a bit of administration to run it, cleaning it after it's been used, and so on. And these are typical running costs of any building. Fortunately, we do have some sources of income here from precisely the uses we've been speaking about: rental by community groups, and events organised by community groups, performances, weddings, and so on, the cafe, and then these occasional bar takings. And our analysis of those costs and those potential income streams is that the building can be a viable proposition on day one. And bear in mind here, on day one, when the community takes ownership of the building, it's in your hands. You have to do something with it. It starts to incur costs from day one. So you need to try and generate some income from day one too. You're going to have these ongoing costs in year one, some alterations and basic upgrading just to make the building an attractive place. In the early days, an enormous commitment required from volunteers, and that means some of you, in fact. We've already got a good team driving the project, good membership building up, but be under no illusion that this is a community project. The community needs to take a hands-on role in it. Having said that, we're looking at a paid manager's post here too from day one, or from a very early point, to actually run and manage the building. Someone that understands a property like this and can really give it some leadership. And then moving on a couple of years ahead, we need to get to a point where there has been some significant investment in the building to make some of these larger scale alterations, to really make that property into a flexible place that can attract more and more activity and use. I think for us though, we've found that most people have bought into this vision. It is a vision that the community embraces and holds. The main thing now is to actually deliver that vision, and as I've just said, that's where you come in. This is a community project. It's not the Action Porty committee project. It's not the consultant's feasibility study project. It's a community project that has to be for and by the community. That is the vision. So please continue to stay involved in this. Sell it to your friends and family and neighbours. The more people that know about this, the more people that are committed to it at an early stage, the better.
Thank you for great presentations and the first voice from the floor. Thank you very much. In the process of your research, did you look at any other community-run buildings of this sort, and are they actually washing their face?
Community centres, community halls, community assets, you're absolutely right. They're not really something you go into for vast profit, right, by their very nature. Most of the ones that survive on a mixture of activities that are relatively low priced to allow full accessibility, some level of projects and grants, and so on. And yes, they do wash their faces. I think that with this building, you actually have an amazing asset that can do more. Okay, I'm an accountant. It's a beautiful building. And where is it? It's in Portobello. It's very close to the beach for Edinburgh. It gets a lot of foot traffic at the beach. It's a great position to be in, not only for your immediate community, but also for others. And your community is growing. Right? There are lots of plans for many new houses in and around Portobello, and many of them, I suspect, will be family homes. So you have a growing market and a fantastic location. And the kind of things you can do in this space, I would suggest, actually include all the things that have been happening. So, for example, near where I live, up in the far north, where I can tell you there's no population, it's not growing, and they've got a beach but it's awfully cold, they run their hall, they include a monthly cinema, they include funeral teas, because actually there are no large funeral directors' parlours to have funeral teas. And there's a massive demand for that kind of life celebration event in a population like this. So my view is absolutely it can wash its face. It can wash its face, it can employ people, it can generate surpluses, and it can do all of that while keeping its costs relatively low. The key to success is always about filling the building.
I live opposite the church. In fact, the view for the lovely cup is, I think, from my front window. I'm wondering if you could say something about the parking implications for those in the street.
There is a parking issue in many parts of Portobello that you'll all be only too well aware of. The point with this building is that it's already there as a large space or group of spaces where people congregate. We're fairly confident that the situation isn't going to be noticeably worse. There may be particular events where a significant number arrive by car and have to find somewhere to park. But I guess that might have been the case had the building been operating at full capacity in its current use anyways.
Dalmeny Street, out of the blues, Drill Hall is a comparable space in terms of how it's used. And they've done a survey recently, and they found that 90% of people coming there came by public transport, because the public transport there is good as it is here, or by bicycle or walking. The 10% who didn't come that way were mostly coming because they were setting up stalls or whatever else, and so they can arrange for when they're coming and when they're going. So that's just to be clear, a comparable space had its need for parking was actually much less than they expected or anticipated.
The point about this project, I think, is that it's a local project. It's for the people of Portobello. There may be events from time to time that will attract people from elsewhere, which is probably not a bad thing. But it's primarily intended as a place that local people will use. So I think, as Justin said, you would hope that lots of people would arrive on foot or by public transport or by bicycle.
Is there not the chance that Portobello Town Hall would be a big rival?
The town hall seems to cater to some extent to bigger events that are attracting people up from beyond Portobello, in fact, national events. But it's a very different kind of a venue too, and it's managed in a very different way. Is what we do in this new proposal going to take trade from somewhere else, or are all the user groups now going to descend upon this building and nowhere else will have any income from them? So if that was going to happen, you wouldn't get funding for this project. We need to be confident that what we're doing here is providing something that's different and is meeting a particular need. And Hazel has looked at the Portobello Town Hall and what they do, and we're fairly confident that there's not too much of an overlap.
I was interested in what you said about the insulation, increasing the insulation in the building. Have you actually surveyed what insulation is already there, especially in the roof, considering the age of that property and the poor quality of insulation that might have been put in? Now, are there any big hits that you can have? Can you get grants for that work? And obviously this will feed into whatever heating system you're considering for the future. Are you considering more sustainable forms of heating rather than just a gas boiler?
We can insulate underneath the floor and we can insulate in the roof. They're very simple things to do. We can draft-proof the windows. That's not a difficult thing to do. We can add secondary glazing, and those are things that would be supported by the Council in Historic Scotland. We wouldn't want to fundamentally change the fabric of the building. When it comes to the church halls, those 1960s buildings, we can essentially wrap a tea cosy around the outside, a layer of rigid wood fibre or a layer of rigid insulation, and then reclad it. The external appearance of the halls, some people quite like it, some people don't think it's that bonny. If we re-insulate it and then reclad it, we can make the halls look a lot more attractive than they are at the moment. We can put a layer of insulation over the top, we can improve the windows. And if we do all that, if we improve the building to reduce the heat loss and reduce the energy cost first, then the amount of energy that we need to generate afterwards from solar panels, anything like that, is much, much smaller. And if the kit is smaller, then the running costs are smaller, your maintenance costs are smaller too. So insulation and draft proofing first, kit afterwards.
I was expecting a first floor in the newer bit of the building, or a mezzanine or something like that. I thought there would be enough height to increase the capacity.
We haven't thought about that. There hasn't been any demand really coming through to put a second story on top of the main hall. if that's what you're suggesting. But there has been some demand for additional accommodation that could go on top of the small hall. And Historic Scotland, where they didn't have any issues about that at all when we discussed it with them.
I think there's also talk of putting a garden area on top of the small hall, wasn't there?
Yes, there was a lovely suggestion at the first consultation about using the roofs of the existing church halls as for beehives.
Justin mentioned at the beginning, this church dates from 1809. It's a very valuable piece of architecture in the community. We value it as a place, but we also value it in some kind of a way as a sacred space. And many of us will still continue to feel that aspect of it needs to be safeguarded in some kind of a way.
It's one of the fundamental characteristics of this church is the internal space of the church itself. It is amazing, the quality of that space when you go into it. The acoustics, we've been told, are incredible. There's a lovely sense of space, a lovely sense of light, and that sense of space is brought about by the fact that when you go into the building, when you stand on the stage or you're close to the pulpit, you, quite rightly, you can see everybody and everybody can see you, and we wouldn't wish to change that. And our suggestion of doing this, of levelling off the rear parts of the mezzanine seating, they wouldn't affect the architectural quality in a bad way.
The motivation for keeping the place was to do with the halls and the importance that those have had for the everyday uses. But equally important is the church building itself, being able to use it for weddings, being able to use it for performances put on by the community, that should be kept as a space architecturally, that is a space that is still sacred in a sense, but in a different way, in a way that is meaningful for whoever's bringing their meaning to it. So that's part of this. We're not putting forward a plan that wipes it clean. We're trying to gather a plan from everybody, which I think you've done really well, which the consultants have done really well, to express who we are and what we need going forward, both in the kind of everyday and in the special.
You've got the enthusiasm at the moment. You have a lot of people committed, but 3 years down the line, how are you going to maintain the momentum of that to make sure that it works?
I suppose what I'm going to say is actually, this is a challenge, and it isn't just 3 years down the line. Actually, it's 5 years when your initial group is kind of burnt out. They're quite tired. They want to hand over to some other volunteers, and all of a sudden they turn around and there's nobody there. Very, very common. So that's an issue. And part of this is about making sure that this centre, this facility, generates enough money to support a permanent, full-time job so that actually the centre becomes self-sustaining and the trustees are easier to find. The further challenge is going to be that actually it will take quite a long time you can move in tomorrow, and as Richard says, you can tidy up the carpets and put like a paint on it and do a few things to it, but to actually achieve the ambitions of the group and the ambitions of the community will require quite a lot of money and quite a long funding process, and I would suggest to you, looking at similar projects you've been involved in, you are looking at about 2 years of fundraising and then about a year of building. So we're talking about 4 years before the whole thing transforms into what your vision is. It's actually up to you, the community, to respond to that challenge, to step forward, to be there, to be part of the membership, to help out. I know that Action Porty is looking for people to help out in specific areas right now, and I have to say to you, I would really encourage you to step forward.
So what's the bottom line? How much is this all going to cost? Do we have estimates of that kind of nature?
We expect the quantity surveyors' budget cost estimates by the end of this week, and those will feed into the business plan. We have draft costs for the business plan, but it's more useful to present those when we have estimated costs for the refurbishment. That cost for the refurbishment will be split into a series of phases too. First phase being move in and do the bare minimum to make it habitable and usable now. The next phase, do a little bit more to improve the energy efficiency. Next phase, build the foyer. Next phase, convert the belfry into a viewing tower, for example. Those will all be set out in the business plan and costed so that we can work out how feasible these are and how much revenue is going to be generated from those over the next few years.
And we don't yet know how much the building is going to cost. I mean, we have the right to buy the building. That doesn't mean we can offer any price we choose. We can't offer £2 and expect the Church of Scotland to accept that. so we will have to pay a negotiated price. I think one thing that reassured me when we got the first report back from you, and I don't know if this is still the case, Sam, we could take occupation and expect to spend something like 45 grand over the first 3 years. And that felt quite reassuring, because that doesn't sound like a huge amount of money. But there will be a big fundraising effort needed. Be under no illusions about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the outdoor space.
The area around here on the side of the church is nicely enclosed. It appears more like a kind of contemplative, quiet area, which could have a number of uses for people who would like that kind of a space. It could be a good growing space as well. The front area here is already an attractive garden space. We think that when we add the foyer cafe space in here, that it would have a glazed front, and the small hall already has a glazed front. It's a really lovely, attractive, enclosed, secure garden space, and you could imagine that people could sit and have a cup of coffee, and children could happily play around in the garden space there. There's also this other interesting opportunity with this darker green strip here, the approach to the church, the paved area in front of it, which is a very significant space. Parts of it are just in gravel with some trees at the moment, and there's some paving which isn't enormously attractive. There's a real opportunity to actually focus on that space and how it can be brought into active use. And I think that tying that in with other events like Big Busk on the beach, for example, and the arts events and so on, it could be a great opportunity too. And these spaces are basically open books there. If you have ideas for them, then they can all develop over the coming months.
As you've heard, over the next couple of weeks we hope to complete the feasibility study, or rather our consultancy team will complete the feasibility study, and Hazel will be working on developing a more detailed business plan. Once we've got both these documents, that will enable us to move to the next stage, which is buying Bellfield. We will have to appoint a lawyer fairly soon and open up formal discussions or negotiations with the Church of Scotland about the valuation and the kind of conditions attached to any sale. We hope to get the bulk of the money from the Scottish Land Fund. We're working on a Stage 2 application, which we intend to submit by the 2nd of December, so it's quite a short time scale. But if we manage to hit that time scale, we should find out the answer or the decision about our application by mid-January. If we're successful with the application, that should fund between 85% and 95% of the acquisition cost. So, depending on the agreed purchase price, we're all required to raise a further something between 25,000 and 60,000 just to acquire the church. There's various options for doing that. We're looking at other grant funds to complement the Scottish Land Fund. At the same time, we need to begin work, or begin the process to look at post-acquisition development costs, again, some of which have been mentioned. In addition to that, there will also be additional capital development costs, repairs, probably around 40 to 50,000, I think we believe at the moment, refurbishment, adaptions, furnishings and equipment, etc. And as you've heard, some of that could be phased over a number of years. The feasibility report should give us a ballpark figure of how much money we'll have to raise for the major capital work and also how it could be phased. So as soon as the feasibility process is complete, we will then be engaging with a number of other funders, particularly the Heritage Lottery Fund, the Architectural Heritage Fund, Historic Environment Scotland, and any other potential funders we can identify who can support the costs. As you've heard, the ultimate aim is for Bellfield to wash its face financially, but maybe in the short term possible to access some review funding, which will give us a leg start, if you like, towards establishing the business. However, depending on how we get on, we may at some point in the process have to think about raising some money locally, either some form of crowdfunding or perhaps a community share issue. But at this point in time, we have nothing specific planned, so you can keep your money in your pocket for the moment. But
don't spend it all.
It will make interest, and we'll come back to it at some point if there's any shortfall for various parts of the project. As you've heard from Justin, in due course we'll hold a general meeting and formally elect a board of directors. we'll continue to recruit members. And we've had a really great response, as Justin said, to the membership drive. But we do want to recruit more members, so do pass the word on. It would be great to see some more young people in particular involved in the project. I think it's important to stress that nothing is finalised yet. It's still an emerging and evolving idea, an evolving project. There is space for further suggestions, etc. But what we need to do going forward is narrow that towards the vision, I think, and develop a sort of clearer and clearer project. That's particularly important when we go to funders. We need to be clear about what we're saying, what committee needs its meeting, etc. So we do need to keep refining the dialogue, the discussion and the ideas as we go forward.
Could you give us an idea, if everything went swimmingly from now on, when you would get the keys?
The Scottish Land Fund, because it's the first year of the larger land fund, is very keen to get quite a lot of money out the door. So I'm fairly confident that if we get the application right, we could get that. And as I said, we would find out about that probably mid-January. So I suppose the two variables in how we move forward are how quickly we can negotiate with the church and come to a negotiated solution. And secondly, how we're going to actually pull together the match funding, just that balance of whatever isn't funded by the Scottish Land Fund, and again, how quickly we can do that. I mean, if you're asking me to guess, 6 months, 8 months seems like a reasonable guess, but I mean, really it's kind of quite hard to estimate. It depends on both these variables.
There's been two guiding principles really behind the group that has taken things this far. One is that we want to use the spaces at Bellfield in cooperation with and to augment existing community activity in Portobello, not in competition with it. And the other is that we want in everything we do to be as transparent as possible. And tonight has been part of that. We've put on the table what we have had from our very excellent consultants. And the business plan, as it's developed, is open to inspection by members of Action Porty. So if you're a member of the company or a member of the community, we want to be able to share things with you, not to keep them close to our chest. I just want to close by echoing some of the things we've heard from the consultants. They say things like, fantastic space. The location is wonderful. And it's just so good to hear that being echoed from outside, because I feel that about it, but I may be biased. But to hear a group of professionals come from outside and say, what a tremendous opportunity we've got here, it would be a shame not to make the most of that opportunity. So thank you very much indeed as well.